The Elder Scrolls has dozens of vampire clans scattered across Tamriel, and each one evolved differently depending on where it took root. From mist-walking predators in Valenwood's canopy to aristocratic courts hidden beneath Skyrim's ice, vampirism doesn't just spread in this universe. It adapts. So today, I'm breaking down every vampire clan and bloodline in Elder Scrolls and everything that makes them unique, starting with one that has a very uncomfortable relationship with religion: Kirulth Clan. The Kirulth Clan, also known as the Shademist Vampires, are one of 4 major vampire clans native to Valenwood, and on the surface, that sounds pretty standard. Vampires live in a forest. Cool, but here's where it gets complicated, because Valenwood isn't just any forest. It's a forest governed by a divine pact that dictates literally everything the Bosmer can and cannot do. The Green Pact is a deal between the Bosmer and the nature spirit Yafrit. Do not harm the forests. Do not eat anything made from plants. Eat only meat. When you conquer your enemies, consume them. It's a strict, carnivorous, spiritually binding contract that governs Bosmeri life down to their diet. Now imagine you're a vampire living under those rules. The Kirulth didn't just become vampires and abandon their culture. Their vampirism adapted to it. The clan emphasizes a carnivorous, stealthy feeding style that doesn't technically violate the pact's meat-only requirements. You're already supposed to eat flesh. You're already supposed to consume your enemies. The Kirulth just cranked that obligation up to a supernatural extreme. Whether that counts as a violation or a perverse fulfillment of Yffra's law is something the lore deliberately leaves open, which is, not ideal for the Bosmer theologians trying to figure this out. But the real signature of this clan isn't their diet. It's their ability to disintegrate into mist. The book Immortal Blood describes the Kirulth as vampires who can dissolve their physical form entirely, becoming something closer to fog than flesh. In Valenwood's dense canopy, where visibility drops to 0 and undergrowth swallows sound, this is a terrifyingly effective hunting adaptation. You're not outrunning something you can't see. You're not fighting something that isn't solid. They drift through the trees like weather and reconstitute only when they're already on top of. Think of it as an evolutionary response to environment. The Volkihar adapted to ice. The Cyrodiil vampirum adapted to politics. The Kirulth adapted to a jungle so dense that the only viable predator strategy is to stop being a physical object entirely. What makes the Kirulth interesting from a broader lore perspective is what they prove about vampirism itself. Molag Bal's curse doesn't just spread, it integrates. It molds itself around local customs, local religions, local environments, and produces something uniquely horrible every single time. No culture is immune, no matter how strict its divine laws. But if you think a few mist vampires hiding in trees is unsettling, wait until you see what happens when vampirism takes root on an island full of people who already hate the undead. The Vardenfell clans. The Vardenfell vampire clans are some of the oldest and most regional strains of vampirism in the Elder Scrolls, deeply tied to Morrowind's brutal landscape and culture. Unlike the sprawling vampire orders of Cyrodiil or the aristocratic Volkihar of Skyrim, these clans are fractured, scattered, and hunted relentlessly by Dunmer authorities, and the powerful Tribunal Temple. They live in shadows, outsiders even among the secretive undead. Here's the thing. Each Vardenfell clan represents a completely different vampiric archetype, making them a mini taxonomy of vampirism locked into one island. The Burn are stealth specialists, masters of slipping unseen through caves and ruins, striking fast and silent. The Onde wield raw magical power, destruction, illusion, and control spells that tear enemies apart from afar. And the Quara are classic bruisers, relying on brute strength and melee fury to overwhelm foes. It's basically rock, paper, scissors. Stealth beats power, power crushes strength, and strength smashes stealth. Before you tune out thinking typical video game factions, hear me out. This triptych isn't just gameplay mechanics, it's how vampirism evolved in isolation under extreme pressure. Dunmer culture and religion are deeply hostile to undeath, pushing these vampires into secrecy and specialization to survive. Their feeding habits clash with Morrowind's taboos, and the Tribunal Temple's harsh persecution. Vampires are hunted constant, so these clans couldn't be generalists. They had to carve out unique niches, magic over muscle, stealth over brute force, to avoid extinction. Social rejection is brutal. In a society riddled with caste systems and religious zealotry, vampirism is the ultimate taboo. The Tribunal Temple condemns the undead not just as enemies of the living, but as blasphemers against their gods. The Dunmer see vampires as a disgraceful, dangerous plague, not shadowy nobles or power brokers. So instead of ruling or infiltrating, these vampires hide in tunnels, caves, and ruins, always hunted and desperate. And here's where it gets weird. Despite their marginalization, the Vardenfell clans prove vampirism isn't a monolithic curse. It diversifies and adapts depending on environment, culture, and necessity. The harsh ashlands force Burn's stealthy hit-and-run attacks. Dunmer's magical traditions shape the Ondi's spellcasting. Brutal open combat hones the Quara's raw physical fury. These vampires evolved like isolated species on an island, each twisting Molag Bal's gift into something uniquely suited to their surroundings. But don't imagine unity. These clans are fractured, often at odds, and far from the organized orders of other provinces. They're scattered pockets of outcasts, violence, each clan wary of the others as much as witch hunters. Their isolation and desperation show vampirism evolving in closed milieus, making them unpredictable survivors with no grand plan. So if you think vampires in the Empire are all posh lords lurking in shadows, the Vardenfell clans bust that myth hard. They're far from polished, courtly undead. Instead, they show vampirism as fractured, localized horror, born in society's cracks, honed by violence, and sustained by shadows. But if you think these tragic clans are the peak of vampirism's power, wait until you hear about Cyrodiil's Vampirum Order, the masters of manipulation and political intrigue. The Cyrodiil, vampirism, mystique. Vampirism in Cyrodiil isn't just a curse. It's a centuries-old curse wrapped in politics, power, and secrecy. While the games don't detail a specific Vampirum Order, Cyrodiil's vampires are less about brute force and more about blending into society's shadows. They're not your typical bloodthirsty monsters lurking in the dark. They operate with patience, subtlety, and ruthless calculation beneath the Empire's surface. Before you picture aristocrats sipping blood-red wine in the Imperial City, hear me out. Cyrodiilic vampires don't have a unique strain that lets them stroll in sunlight without consequences. Daylight still burns them. There's no getting around turning to ash on the steps of the Elder Council. But their real power lies in controlled feeding, secretive behavior, and hiding in plain sight. They don't roar from the rooftops. They whisper in dark corridors, influencing immortal and mortal affairs alike. The game portrays vampirism in Cyrodiil much like elsewhere, marked by weakness to sun and fire, feeding frenzy and monstrous appearances over time if not controlled. There's no official clan described as a hidden shadow government or a vampiric cabal pulling imperial strings. Instead, vampires operate mostly in secret, isolated pockets of nobles or criminals, blending fear and influence but mostly staying underground. Their infiltration is more subtle than cinematic, with the occasional noble vampire like Janus Hassildor of Skingrad exemplifying how vampirism might be managed discreetly rather than ruling openly. The Order of the Virtuous Blood Quest from Oblivion is about vampire hunters rooting out undead threats, not a group compromised by vampiric corruption. It's a straightforward clash between mortals and monsters, not a tangled web of double agents or vampire-run courts. That said, restraint and subterfuge are still necessities for vampires in Cyrodiil. They must continually feed, but carefully avoid exposure. Their humanity and hunger exist in constant tension, living on a razor's edge between survival and discovery. Their survival isn't nobility, it's practical necessity. Vampirism here is a curse forced into coexistence with society, not a political tool forged into dominance behind a velvet curtain. This uneasy balance creates moral gray zones. They are predators forced to hide, and humans battling their monstrous side, trapped in a cycle of survival without glory or control. Cyrodiilic vampirism is less about cold manipulation of society and more about desperate concealment, setting it apart from the openly monstrous or politically ambitious vampire clans found elsewhere in Tamriel. While not officially named or structured as an ancient order, Cyrodiilic vampires have endured for centuries by adapting to human norms, hiding their weakness, nurturing alliances, and refusing to exist only in legend or fear. They've woven themselves into the Empire's fabric, unseen but influential in small but vital ways. But if you think that's the whole story of vampirism in Cyrodiil, just wait. The next section dives into one of the rare nobles who lives that tension out loud, Janus Hassildor, who walks the tightrope between curse and crown. Janus Hassildor. Count Janus Hassildor is a vampire who breaks the usual mold of monstrous undead lords. Far from a rampaging predator or a dark conspirator, he's a noble ruler quietly holding sway over Skingrad in Oblivion. His story is subtler than most vampire tales, wrapped in tragedy, political intrigue, and a desperate hope for redemption. Before you dismiss him as just another vampire count, hear me out. His vampirism is treated less like an immediate curse and more like a chronic condition he manages meticulously. Officially, he's a politician holding a title in the imperial province of Cyrodiil, but behind closed doors, Janus wrestles with a personal hell, his wife Rona's slow descent into a coma-like state caused by their shared vampirism. The official line seems straightforward. Janus is a vampire ruling Skingrad discreetly, and that's what most players first see. But the game's vampire cure quest adds layers of complexity, showing vampirism as a disease that might very rarely be reversed. In his desperate quest to save Rona, Janus commissions the player to gather exotic ingredients: grand soul gems, nightshade, bloodgrass, Argonian blood, and something called the Dust of Hindorol, a powerful vampire. The sheer difficulty of this alchemical cure highlights how vampirism isn't some easily fixed curse. It's a complicated affliction blending magic, biology, and Daedric influence. The quest's outcome is haunting. As Melisande attempts the cure, it doesn't restore Rona to life. Instead, she dies, either because the cure failed or perhaps because release from undeath was the only mercy left. Janus doesn't come off like a villain. He's a man crushed by his condition, hoping for a way out for the person he loves. Here's the thing. Janus represents vampirism's political subtlety. He maintains power not by terrifying the populace into submission, but by careful secrecy and delegation. His steward, Hal Liers, manages most interactions with outsiders, while Janus controls his public appearances cautiously. The Mages Guild knows his his secret, and there's a strong implication that the Imperial leadership tolerates him, as long as he remains discreet and loyal. This suggests that Elder Scrolls vampires can wield political influence behind the scenes, challenging the idea that vampirism only isolates or corrupts. But here's where it gets weird. Despite his apparent restraint and tragedy, Janus embraces his vampirism enough to rule with it for years. He's no victim clinging desperately to mortality. He's accepted the curse, but longs for release for his wife. This tension highlights the moral complexity of vampirism. It's a condition that can become both a source of power and a prison. Janus embodies the conflicted vampire archetype, balancing secrecy, personal loss, and political responsibility all at once. His quest also introduces players to the possibility of reversing vampirism through careful preparation and sacrifice, a rare route against Molag Bal's corrupting influence. It's symbolic redemption, offering a sliver of hope in a setting soaked with darkness. If you think vampirism is purely about bloodlust and night stalking, Janus Hassildor forces you to reconsider. He's the vampire who wears a crown weighed down by memory, love, and unbreakable secrecy. But if you think that's subtle, wait until you meet the Volkihar clan, vampires who embrace their curse as an open declaration of power and doom. The Volkihar clan. The Volkihar clan isn't just any vampire family, they're the real heavy hitters in Skyrim's undead world. Founded by Lord Harkon's grim pact with Molag Bal, this clan isn't about sneaky bloodsucking in the shadows. Nope, it all started with Harkon sacrificing 1,000 innocents just to secure pure-blood vampirism straight from the Daedric Prince of Domination. This wasn't some casual curse or unlucky infection. It was a deliberate, grand-scale deal with cosmic horror written all over it. Before you think they're just uncultured monsters, the Volkihar are shockingly aristocratic. Think a dark vampire court with chilling etiquette, plotting, and ancient traditions clinging to every cold stone of Castle Volkihar. They glide through the night with devastating supernatural powers, levitating like ghosts, transforming into swarms of bats, and wielding blood magic so potent it's borderline theatrical. These aren't your regular fanged fiends. They command the eerie majesty of true vampiric nobility, wrapped in an icy, merciless stare. Here's where things get apocalyptic. The Volkihar's ultimate ambition revolves around an ancient prophecy, the tyranny of the sun. Harkon wants to literally blot out the sun using the Elder Scrolls and his daughter Serana's unique blood. Why? To remove the one environmental thing stopping vampires from ruling Nirn openly. No hiding, no fear of sunlight, just pure reign of darkness. It's a cosmic-level power grab that's less gothic romance and more grim end-of-the-world fantasy. And that solar eclipse scheme? It's terrifying in scale and nature, with the potential to rewrite the whole balance between light and dark on Tamriel. But the horror isn't just in the blood magic or the sun-eating plants. The Daedric Pact itself is a massive, brutal escalation. Sacrifice wasn't just symbolic. Thousands of innocents were slaughtered as a price for this unholy inheritance. Molag Bal's role here is that of a dark architect, crafting this vampire lineage as a weaponized extension of his sphere. The Volkihar clan isn't a random gang of Night Stalkers. It's a carefully constructed army of pure-blooded vampires born from unspeakable cruelty and ambition. What makes the Volkihar even more chilling is their cold, ruthless contrast between wild monstrosity and refined courtliness. Within Castle Volkihar's walls, centuries of tradition shape everything, from whispered power struggles to sinister rituals. Outside, they're relentless predators locked in a bitter feud with the Dawnguard vampire hunters. The clan's members show a terrifying blend of measured politicking and brutal savagery that keeps Skyrim's undead scene endlessly fascinating and dangerous. This clan also sparks debates within vampire lore circles. Are they the epitome of vampiric power through pure-blood lineage, or are they drifting into decadent stagnation? Some fans argue the Dawnguard portrayal softens their monstrous nature, turning them into more aristocratic villains than ice-breathing nightmares described in older texts like Immortal Blood. Meanwhile, others see their apocalyptic vision as the darkest, most extreme extension of vampirism's inherent threat. Regardless, the Volkihar clan stands as a towering example of vampirism's potential, a terrifying blend of Daedric horror, noble court intrigue, and world-ending ambition. If you think this aristocratic bloodline is as bad as it gets, wait until we dive into the personal story of the clan's most famous daughter of Coldharbour. Next up, Serana. Serana isn't your typical vampire. She's the daughter of Lord Harkon and Valerica, but more than that, she's a daughter of Coldharbour, a rare title given to those directly transformed by Molag Bal himself. This isn't just a bite or disease. It's a dark ritual that turned her into a pure-blood vampire with powers and a destiny unlike any other. Before you roll your eyes at another tragic vampire story, hear me out. Serana embodies the deepest moral tension in all of Elder Scrolls vampirism. She's not a mindless monster or some power-hungry villain. She's conflicted, complicated, and caught between her dark birthright and the chance for redemption. Her story is as much about family and choice as it is blood and darkness. Officially, Serana's vampirism comes from a pact her parents made with Molag Bal centuries ago. Harkon and Valerica offered her up in a Daedric ritual, binding her soul to Coldharbour itself. This link gives Serana unique necromantic abilities, abilities, and shields her from typical vampire weaknesses. She can raise the dead, wield dark magic, and has strength beyond ordinary vampires. But here's the kicker. Her blood is key to an apocalyptic prophecy. According to this prophecy, tied to Auriel's bow, Serana's blood can either blot out the sun or restore its light. Harkon wants to use this power to permanently shroud the world in darkness, letting vampires rule openly. But Serana is deeply ambivalent about that fate. Bound by blood, but unwilling to fully back her father's vision, she stands as a symbol of the struggle between destiny and free will, between serving a cruel cosmic plan or choosing her own path. Let's get specific. Over a century ago, Serana was sealed in Dimhollow Crypt by her mother to protect her from Harkon's relentless pursuit. She's been trapped in stasis there, burdened by her bloodline but spared from her family's fanaticism. When the Dragonborn frees her during the Dawnguard questline, it triggers one of the most personal and morally complex vampire stories the game offers. Unlike most vampires, Serana doesn't revel in her powers or curse her condition outright. Instead, she questions it. She jokes, fears, and shows tenderness, making her more human than many who share her curse. She won't be a pawn for Harkon's schemes, and her alliance with the player can shift, helping stop the prophecy or leaning into it. Her narrative invites players to see vampirism not just as a curse or conquest, but as an ethical quagmire where loyalty, survival, and morality collide. Her unique necromantic gifts set her apart. She summons skeletal warriors, raises corpses, and manipulates shadows unlike any other vampire. This power isn't just flashy. It marks her closeness to Coldharbour and Molag Bal's realm. It's a physical and metaphysical sign of her status, tethered between Nirn and the bloody abyss of the Daedric Prince's domain. Here's where it gets weird. Serana's blood isn't just rare, it's potentially world-ending. When combined with Auriel's bow, her blood can snuff out the sun or restore its light, depending on who controls it. This makes her the linchpin of the Dawnguard story and a literal battleground for Tamriel's future. As a daughter of Coldharbour, she also embodies the core conflict of Elder Scrolls vampirism, the eternal war between Molag Bal's dominion and Arkay's life and death balance. Her bond to Coldharbour traps her soul in a liminal space, neither fully alive nor dead, permanently marked by Daedric corruption. Still, despite this grim fate, Serana's personality brings hope and complexity. She challenges the simple villain vampire trope by showing even those created through brutal Daedric rituals can harbor doubt, desire mercy, and forge their own paths. It's no wonder she's a fan favorite and one of the most compelling characters in the series. But if you think Serana's story is dark and tangled, wait until you meet the man who started it all, Lord Harkon. That's next, Lord Harkon. Most villains in the Elder Scrolls want power. Harkon wanted to rewrite the sky, and the scariest part isn't that he almost pulled it off. It's that Molag Bal probably wanted him to try and fail. Here's the thing about Harkon. He wasn't just some random Nord who got turned in a cave. He was a king, a mortal ruler who looked death in the face and decided that was unacceptable. So he did what any reasonable person would do. Pledged himself to the Daedric Prince of Domination, sacrificed 1,000 innocents, and asked nicely for immortality. Molag Bal, being the generous soul he is, said yes. He transformed Harkon, his wife Valerica, and his daughter Serana into pure-blood vampires. The whole family got the deluxe package, which, you know, is not ideal for family dinners. That sacrifice is what sets Harkon apart from almost every other vampire in Tamriel. He didn't catch a disease or get ambushed. He marched straight to Molag Bal's door with 1,000 corpses and said, "I want the premium vampire, please." And he got it. First generation, pure-blood vampirism. The real deal. The kind that lets you become a vampire lord, summon gargoyles, drain life from across a room, and transform into a swarm of bats, because apparently that's just a perk when you're the prince's favorite. More importantly, Harkon can grant this pure-blood vampirism to others. Not the watered-down sanguinaire vampirus spreading like a cold in Skyrim's caves, but legit, direct from Molag Bal vampirism. He's not just a vampire, he's a full franchise. But here's where it gets messy. Despite being immortal, hugely powerful, and commanding a massive castle with an army of undead, Harkon wasn't satisfied. He obsessed over the tyranny of the sun prophecy. The plan? Take Auriel's bow, combine it with the blood of a daughter of Coldharbour, fire it at the sun, and blot it out forever. No sunlight, no vampire weakness. Vampires ruling the surface eternally. Sounds great on paper. In reality, it meant Harkon viewed his daughter Serana as a ritual tool rather than family. He subjected her to Molag Bal's ritual to make her a daughter of Coldharbour so her blood could fuel the prophecy. When Valerica discovered this, she hid Serana in Dimhollow Crypt for centuries. Harkon's reaction to his wife protecting their child? How dare she? That says all you need to know about his priorities. And this is where fan criticism hits hard. Harkon's plan is, strategically speaking, catastrophically stupid. He already has immortality, a secure fortress, and one of Tamriel's strongest vampire bloodlines. Blotting out the sun doesn't just help vampires. It forces every mortal nation, every Aedric worshipper, and every rival Daedric prince into a united front against it. The Cyrodiil Vampirum Order proved vampires thrive best in shadows, quiet and unseen. Harkon studied that and said, nope, I want to fight literally everyone at once. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Harkon isn't a strategist because he was never meant meant to be. Molag Bal is the prince of domination, control through force, cruelty for its own sake, breaking things just because you can. Harkon didn't just gain Molag Bal's blood, he inherited his worldview, the obsession with dominance over wisdom, the willingness to sacrifice family for power, and the need to flaunt his strength instead of hiding it. Harkon isn't a vampire who serves Molag Bal, he's Molag Bal's avatar wearing a crown. 1,000 innocents bought him eternity. He spent that eternity proving immortality. Without wisdom is just arrogance stretched out over time. But if Harkon is what happens when a mortal seeks out Molag Bal's gift willingly, there's someone who represents the opposite. Someone who never asked for it. Someone who was the first. LeMay Bal. Every bloodline we've talked about, every clan, every court, every frozen castle full of power-hungry Nords, all of it traces back to one moment, one woman, one act so cosmically violent that it broke the rules of life and death permanently. LeMay Bealfag was a Nedic priestess of Arkay, a servant of the god who governs the natural cycle between living and dying. And Molag Bal, the Daedric prince of domination, chose her specifically because of that. He didn't just want to create a monster. He wanted to defile Arkay's domain at the source. What happened to LeMay wasn't a pact. It wasn't a bargain. It was pure violation. Molag Bal forced himself upon her, mingling his blood with hers in an act designed to be the ultimate desecration of everything Arkay stood for. And when it was over, her own village killed her. The people she lived among looked at what she'd become and chose violence. Here's the thing. She didn't stay dead. Arkay's whole job is shepherding souls from life to death. Clean transitions, orderly cycles. But when LeMay needed him most, nothing happened. Molag Bal's claim was stronger, so she rose. Not as a ghost, not as a revenant, but as something entirely new. The first vampire. And her first act as an immortal was to curse Arkay's name. That's not just anger. That's a theological declaration of war. Every vampire that exists after LeMay carries that curse in their veins. Vampirism isn't just a disease or a Daedric gift. It's a standing middle finger to the divine order, a permanent tear in the fabric that Arkay is supposed to maintain, and he can't fix it. Thousands of years later, he still can't fix it. LeMay didn't stop at cursing the gods either. In Elder Scrolls Online, she founded an entire cult built around rejecting both Arkay and mortal society. She created the Noxophilic Sanguivoria strain, a form of vampirism that thrives beneath the moons. Her followers don't see themselves as cursed. They see themselves as liberated. They venerate Lamai as a dark mother and treat their undeath as a superior spiritual state, which is, a lot to unpack theologically. But what makes Lamai truly terrifying isn't her power. It's what she represents. Every vampire we've covered today exists because of a cosmic violation that nobody has been able to undo. The Kiroth dissolving into mist in Valenwood, downstream of LeMay, the Cyrodiil Vampirum Order pulling strings in the Imperial City, downstream of LeMay, Harkon trying to blot out the sun with his daughter's blood, all downstream consequences from one woman's transformation. The hierarchy of blood purity in Elder Scrolls vampirism isn't about genealogy charts. It's about proximity to that original moment, and nobody is closer than LeMay Bal. She is the moment, the first daughter of Coldharbour, the first scream of defiance against a god who failed her, the reason every vampire in Tamriel hungers, kills, and refuses to die. Not all origin stories have a moral. This one definitely doesn't. It's just violation and rage and an eternal curse that nobody asked for, spiraling outward across an entire continent for thousands of years. And somewhere in the dark, LeMay is still out there, still angry, still refusing to forgive. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.